Hi everyone, and welcome to the Personal Finance Playbook. I'm your host, Jack Wang of Longhorn Financial. As parents, we worry about our students going to and while they're in college, of course. What they're going to major in, how will they do, and of course, we wonder if they're going to get a good job after graduation. The stress is compounded by the fact that oftentimes students themselves don't know what they want. And we as parents, we might be paying big dollars while they're trying to figure that out. Right? I know for myself, it can be quite stressful. But today's special guest will offer a little insight into his personal journey and his new career, and share tips for other college graduates or college students and recent grads. Joining me today is my good friend Jacob Ashley, a recent graduate of University of Massachusetts Lowell. Thanks for being on the show today, Jake.
Jack, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's get right into it. So you and I have actually known each other for a little while because we met under some different circumstances. But share with our audience your journey, sort of picking UMass Lowell, and what did you want to major in originally, and talk about sort of where you are today in terms of the recent graduation.
Absolutely. So I graduated from Chelmsford High School 2013, and that's when the college search began. Now I applied to I think it was 9 or 10 schools, so it was a lot of schools. However, I ultimately decided to break it down to 3, and it was 2 other schools and then UMass Lowell. And UMass Lowell initially was almost a backup school, and ultimately I was speaking with my parents, and the affordability was critical. That was a huge decision-making part. But next, it was the proximity to home. So I'm from Chelmsford, and ultimately that's how I decided on it. It was huge bang for your buck, and I knew it was a growing university. So I ultimately decided to pursue business, accounting, and finance specifically. I've always had that inclination for business and entrepreneurial-minded opportunities. So that's ultimately how I began that journey to search.
Okay, and did you start out as a business major right out of the gate?
I actually did. So throughout even middle school, I had always been interested in business, entrepreneurship, snow blowing people's yards, and cutting their lawns, and it just stuck with me. I had an interest in numbers, I had an interest in finance and money. So that's where I was like, okay, I'm interested in accounting, I'm interested in finance, maybe that's what I want to do in college. I always had in the back of my head that I was interested in it. Some people say, oh, you don't know if you're going to stick with it the whole time, whatever the case is. But I stuck with it, and it has continued to be a passion and interest of mine.
Hey, and specifically, I know you're an aspiring CPA, right? You're going to take the exam soon, I believe.
Correct, yep.
But you also have a real estate focus. So talk to our audience a little bit about sort of where that came about. I know you talked about always being interested in business and numbers and things like that, but specifically real estate, what led to that?
Absolutely. So in high school, we had a career explorations day, and it was junior year, and we could pick 2 professions. So I picked accounting and I picked real estate. Now, the realtor that came in was actually Dennis Reddy, and he gave a great introduction into the real estate world. I had always been interested through real estate HGTV. I just watched that show, and a lot of people will watch it, but it just kind of piqued my interest. Oh, this is something that I could maybe get into. So Dennis spoke from the sales side, realtor. I knew I wanted something with the investments, things like that. He gave me his business card. He says, hey, if you're interested in learning more, send me an email. So I did that, and it was my junior year summer. And he essentially went over Investments 101 in real estate. So I learned more about that, and that's ultimately when I stayed in contact with his father, Joe, through Ready Real Estate, and that's where I got licensed. So it was everything kind of leading up to that point, and then being able to essentially learn on the job.
Right, and just as a disclaimer here, I am familiar with some of those shows. So in reality, it is not that you buy a property, fix it up, and it only takes a half an hour, and then you sell it for $100 grand profit, right?
Absolutely, that is correct, 100% correct.
Yeah, it doesn't quite work that way.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's. But sticking on the college aspect, but I'm sure that fellow students or fellow recent graduates who ended up changing majors, right? Even though you didn't yourself. talk about sort of what you've seen there and maybe a tip that you might have for them. Because, in my experience in working with families, in many cases, the kids don't necessarily know what they want, whereas you really did. So what are the things that you saw when kids were kind of undecided and decided to switch? And like I said, maybe a tip or something.
So I think the biggest thing that I saw, I lived on the Living Learning community at UMass Lowell, which is essentially a group of similar majors. So under the umbrella business, there was about 30 students that were on my floor. So I was able to network with them, and I've kind of stayed in contact with them throughout my college tenure. And what I found the most was that I think a lot of people go into, say, business or some overarching umbrella of that topic, thinking that's what they want. But ultimately, I have friends that went to study math specifically, or maybe they didn't think business was for them altogether. Maybe they went to psychology. So I think it's that passion where they go to something thinking, oh, this is what I want, I have an interest, and then they get into the classwork and they're like, wait a minute, maybe I want to hyper-focus into specifically number crunching and math, or maybe I thought I was interested in HR, but it's really psychology that I'm interested in. So I think it's that passion and really digging deep into what fascinates them the most.
So, and that makes total sense, right? You might take a class while you're in school that really speaks to you, you never knew, so you really love it, and that's what you end up wanting to do. In your experience, and this is simply just a guess from what you've seen, out of all the kids that you know at UMass Lowell, right, current students and recent graduates, what percentage would you say that you've seen that ended up switching versus maybe switching majors, right, versus who didn't? And just your own experience.
Yeah, so I would say based off of the Living Learning community, so those students that I was, say, close with freshman year, I would say it was probably close to 50%.
Really?
Yeah. So, and this, like I said, and you mentioned, it's a number kind of off the top of my head, but I'm just like picking through, some students that I can think of, and some of them I was surprised with, to be honest with you. I'm like, oh, they're still not a business student? But, I stay in contact with them, and it just wasn't for them. They were interested in something else.
Yeah. Okay. So let's switch gears a little bit, and let's talk a little about the real estate. So, so you graduate with an undergraduate degree from UMass Lowell. You're now in the graduate program there, master's in accounting, I believe, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But you've actually had your real estate license for about 4 years, which, if you work backwards, that means that you got your real estate license, like you said, probably junior year, sophomore year, junior year?
Sophomore year it was, yeah.
Sophomore year, okay. So, and I know, speaking off camera, that you've done some sales activities, some open houses, I believe.
Sure, yeah.
Talk to our audience a little bit about sort of that aspect of it, because you're probably a little bit younger than what most people expect the real estate agent to be. So how's that maybe worked to your advantage, and how's that maybe where it's hindered you a little bit?
Right. Yeah, so I think ultimately you bring up a great point where I'm 23 years old. I actually just graduated with my master's in accounting last Saturday.
And congratulations.
Thank you very much. And I've had my real estate license up beginning sophomore year, and to some, they question you. Why? How could you be in this at such a young age? And there's others that are huge supporters of you within the industry. So ultimately, I take everything into consideration, and I just use it to better myself in any endeavor I plan to do. So, there's going to be people that are for you. There's going to be people that are against you in anything that you do. So I think instead of letting it hinder you, you kind of turn it into that motivator. So it's like, oh, I'm going to prove them wrong, or oh, I know I can do better. And you find mentors in the industry, and you just try to grab onto them and learn from them.
So, and so that brings up a great point. I know for myself, right, hindsight, as they say, is always 20/20. So there's plenty of times I'll say, yeah, had I known this 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I would be so much further ahead, or I would have, it would have been so much better. Let me ask you this. What about any recent grads, either undergraduate or graduate, who may be looking at real estate as a potential career? What's a tip or two that you can offer them?
So if you find yourself interested in real estate, or really for anything in that matter, read about it, learn about it, podcasts, whatever it is, get as much information you can, learn as much as you can about that, find a mentor, and then just do it. You get so caught up in, should I do it, should I not do it? you find a mentor, you pick their brains, you give it a year, see how you like it. And ultimately, just take that step, because that's what holds people back the most.
And speaking of podcasts and books, I know, again, we were talking off camera a little bit. What are some good podcast books, whatever courses that maybe you've had experience with that you would recommend to some folks who might be looking to get into real estate and specifically real estate investing? Absolutely.
So the two books that I find critical to real estate investing, personal finance, just in general, I would say Millionaire Real Estate Investor by Gary Keller, founder of Keller Williams Realty. Great investment 101 book in real estate. The other one is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That's another great book, whether personal finance or real estate in general. And then two podcasts that are really good: Bigger Pockets, which is also a website. So they have like a huge forum of veteran real estate investors to starting out real estate investors. So that's another great one. And then another one that kind of is interesting on the business side is How I Built This, which is facilitated through NPR. Great show that kind of shows that entrepreneurial spirit in people.
Okay. So for anyone who might be interested, right, whether they're younger or older, because I run into people who will say, you know what, maybe I'll buy a rental property, rent it out, and I'll make my money that way, or pay for my kids' college that way, whatever, right? So these things come up. What are some tips for someone of any age for getting started? Is it listening to the podcast, or is it something else? What would you say?
Yeah, so I would say that there's 5 key aspects that you should know about real estate. One being cash flow. Right, so does the property produce more income than it costs to operate? It's like a business. The second is leverage, right? Being able to multiply the use of your money. And then you have, tax advantages, you have capital appreciation, and then you have the ability to, I mentioned leverage. So the leverage, cash flow, capital appreciation, tax advantages, and then
well, but just basically having capital work for you and other people's money at that, right?
Exactly.
And that's really the power of real estate, is the leverage, I think.
That's exactly it. And it differentiates. When I first got introduced to real estate investing, that was the biggest or largest difference between the stock market and real estate. It was being able to leverage. It's much more uncommon. I mean, there's ways to do it, but in layman's terms, the difference between real estate and the stock market, being able to multiply that.
Right. So now let's talk a little bit about that. Real estate obviously can be a good investment, but has pitfalls and costs just like anything else, right? So I think oftentimes people will think of stock market or even a savings account. Okay, yes, it can go up. Stock market, of course, certainly has risk, can go down. But with real estate, there's also other costs. So, so for you, obviously, you're interested in real estate and you're going that direction. But, what are some of the pitfalls that perhaps maybe someone who's thinking about getting into it really want to watch out for?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to touch upon number 5. That was actually principal pay down. So in the investing, just paying towards that equity. But I would say the biggest things to watch out for is determining what kind of investments that you want to get into. So you have the passive approach, which is more of the rental property, and you're a landlord, right? So do you want that call at 2 a.m. when the toilet's not working? Items like that. Whereas if you're more of an active investor, maybe you're flipping property, trying to buy it, fix it up, and then sell it for a profit later. That has a whole nother basket of risks, whether it be the market cycle, it's more short term. So I think ultimately when you get started, you want to kind of figure out which way you want to go, and you may not know. You may need a couple properties to figure it out. I mean, the first property is probably not going to be your best property to invest in. So you kind of learn on the job. Sometimes it costs real dollars, but you remember that for the future. So.
Right. And even the financing for investment real estate is a little bit different than residential real estate, right? Well, residential as in I'm going to live there.
Correct.
Right. So what are some differences there that you can share with folks? Because it's ultimately still a mortgage, but the terms are different because it's an investment, right? So what can you share with us?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So depending on how you want to purchase the property, generally, when you're looking for an investment property, say 4 units or less. It's going to be generally 25% down payment, so you're going to want to make sure you have some money. And then from what I understand, you'll need 6 months of cash reserves to offer or to show the bank that you're able to, weather a storm in the case of something happening. So those are two of the big things as opposed to a residential property that you're going to live in. There are some programs that you could go as low as 3.5%, 0% down. So I think that biggest barrier would be that initial down payment. But there's also programs, if you were to live in, say, a multifamily, that you could potentially use that low down payment, live in a unit, maybe rent out the other 2 or other 3, however many there are.
Right, because I know when talking to some folks about this that a lot of times they might know about mortgages because they just refinanced their own house, right? The house that they live in. Oh yeah, like you said, it was, the terms of this, I could roll in my closing costs, and when I first bought it, I didn't have to put that much down. But it is a different ballgame when it comes to investment real estate, right? Now, and again, just to the extent that you can share, whatever, but it's a little bit different if you end up buying and flipping, right? It's one thing if you're going to buy and hold and collect the rental income, but buying, flipping, that financing is now a little bit different because you're looking to get out in a relatively short order, right? So talk to us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Yes, so I would say the biggest difference shifting from a more passive approach like rental property as opposed to the active flipping approach would be that short period of time that the loan is going to be in your favor, right? And then because then I would say generally it can be anywhere from as low as 6 months to maybe as high as 18 months that you're going to get financing. Maybe the property has additional risk, right? So the bank doesn't want that money to be outstanding for a long period of time. Generally, it may be a little bit more interest. It may be a hard money lender, which is another ballgame, but it's much less of a time frame, and then you'll have to refinance it and get another type of loan or sell it to somebody. Whereas with the residential or a rental property, you could have a loan for 15, 20, 30 years. So it's much smaller maturity.
Okay. So right now, of course, the economy is doing reasonably well. Prices are up. And I know even just on the residential side, if you're going to live in the property, people are having a tough time, I think, or my impression is they're having a tough time finding property at reasonable prices without getting into bidding wars and whatever. And I'll be honest, I have no concept of rental real estate or flipping properties. It's not what I do, so I just don't know. But talk to our viewers, so from your perspective, both from a sales side, investment side, what's it really like out there, and where are maybe some pockets or tips where people can get a good deal, quote unquote, right?
Sure. So I think the biggest maybe misconception in real estate is that you have to make your money going in. Right, so you'll often hear, you have to buy it for the right price to do well in real estate for the long term, right? Mm-hmm. However, real estate, the underlying asset, generally over time keeps up with inflation, that underlying asset. So if you can find a property that maybe is undervalued in the sense of cash flow, right? So maybe for example, the units are renting out for $1,000 a piece. Right, and you can find a way to increase that unit's cash flow to $1,250 a month, right? The current owner may not know how to do that. They may just not want to do it. So it's finding opportunities to optimize that space. It's obviously nice if you can buy a property if it's worth, say, $300 for $250. Everyone would love to do that, but the inventory is so low in today's market. Like you said, bidding wars. It wouldn't be surprising to see a property go $25,000, $50,000 above asking. So ultimately, I think you should try to find ways to create value as opposed to seeing it in plain sight.
But really, that in my mind, that kind of gets back to what we talked about earlier, is really having that business mindset, because in a lot of things, people will say, okay, so if the property is worth $300 today, I'm not paying a penny over, or I'm going to try not to pay a penny over $300. But what you're really talking about is sort of seeing that long-term potential, right? Yes, it's worth $300 today, $1,000 a unit.
Right.
But with a paint job in this, I might be able to get $1,250 a unit, and the property will be worth $400,000, right? 2 years from now, let's say, or whatever time frame, right? Being able to really see that potential, that's really the key there.
Exactly. And when you get into properties that are valued on cash flow, right, or capitalization rate, which is something that's generally or often used in larger apartment complexes and items like that. If you can find opportunities that create $50 a month per unit, $100 a month per unit, what doesn't really matter the time frame that you're going to sell it. If you increase that net operating income by $100 across multiple units and they're using a capitalization rate to find that value, it's going to be essentially immediate increase in value. You obviously have to find a buyer, but
sure.
There are opportunities like that. And then if your objective is to hold it long term, the market is working in your favor, 10, 15, 20 years. 1 to 2 years, maybe not. But long term, if you're a long-term holder, you can do pretty well.
So let me ask you personally, so you're an aspiring CPA, just graduated master's in accounting, but you do have this real estate license. So where, just, for your own thing, where are you in that spectrum between, say, I want to buy and hold and rent it out versus I want to flip, for you personally?
So personally, I want to buy a multifamily. I want to live in one unit and maybe buy a 3 or 4 family and rent out those other units. I would say that spectrum would be 18 to 24 months. I'm starting a career in public accounting coming in June, and I'm going to live at home for the first year or two, build up some money, and ultimately I want to buy a down payment. I would like to get into the flipping, but I know that it can be much more risky, given I don't have much of a construction background. Right. So I think the first step, which I already somewhat do, would be like to network with maybe developers or other construction people to kind of see how they approach various projects, and then maybe create a partnership or something like that that I can then learn from an experience. So maybe I partner up with somebody and try to flip to build up that initial down payment. Right,
and so let me kind of bring it back a little bit, back to sort of your fellow recent graduates and stuff. You just brought up networking. A lot of things in business, it's not necessarily what you know, but who you know, right? So, so talk a little bit, and what tips do you have can you offer, not only to your fellow recent graduates,
Sure.
but also to anybody? What are some of the things that you do for networking? How's that helped you? What are some tips for maybe people who don't really understand it, right? Hey, I'm looking for a job. I'm going to work at the job, and come on, what else do I need, right?
Right. So I think the biggest thing to know about networking as a whole is you never know who knows who or how they know somebody. So personally, I like to go to Starbucks, grab a coffee with somebody, just get to know them, whether it was someone that I knew maybe just from class, or maybe it was someone that I saw on LinkedIn and I wanted to connect with. So ultimately, I think it's that first, okay, let's get to know each other. Whether they're in the same industry or not. The fact is, the larger your network is, the larger points of contact you have with different people within the industry or not. So, a lot of people may say, oh, that's strange. Why am I going to randomly email somebody or contact somebody just to grab coffee, right? But when you make yourself uncomfortable, you get exposed to new experiences. And from that point, I've networked with multiple people, and I was like, oh, you know that person? Or, oh, you're connected to that company somehow? And that's ultimately how I think the job market and economy works. How did you get in there? Oh, I got connected through this person, through that person. There's no guarantee you get a job, but you get that face time, you get to do the interview, and if they like you, then you have the job.
Right. So, but you also, so you talked about, grabbing a coffee at Starbucks, right, using LinkedIn. What are some of the other mechanisms or channels that you've used to
Sure.
build out your network?
Yeah, so I love LinkedIn. Huge supporter, huge advocate. I'm always on LinkedIn, fine-tuning my profile because you never know who's going to come across that. Some other social media sites, I use Facebook, I use Twitter. I have a real estate Facebook page that I can use. It's easy to touch multiple followers through a message. So those are the big ones that I use, but it's also nice to compile an email list or something to that nature, a residential mailing address or just contact information. Right. Any way that you can get a point of contact, a New Year's letter, birthday, happy
Yep.
birthday. You know, just those small things, people remember you. And then, you know, maybe you grab coffee, or maybe you're just staying in touch with them. Right. So really any way that you can optimize.
You know, and I know recent graduates are focused on getting that job, right? Probably being pressured by their parents.
Yep.
I know I had that pressure when I was graduating years ago. But not only sort of are you going into public accounting, but you also have this real estate aspect to you, right, with the license and everything else. So talk to our viewers a little bit about sort of, because ideally you're going to have multiple income streams. Right. That's sort of the point here, right?
Right.
What would you say to people who are just focused on getting that job, you know, hey, I just need to land that 9 to 5 so mom and dad get off my case, right? What would you say to them about maybe doing something like real estate or whatever?
Yeah, so what I like to consider real estate, or at least the real estate licensure, being a realtor, is my side hustle, right? Just that quote unquote side hustle.
Yep.
It's a way that I can build a brand. You know, I can give someone my business card and they remember me through that. So I'm very excited to get into public accounting. I'm very excited to be with the firm I'm going to. But it's also important to be able to use any knowledge that I've learned in the past, either through this job, through other internships, and utilize it in other ways. Because I can guarantee you that what I'm learning in the real estate or being a realtor is going to benefit me in public accounting in some way, whether it's the face-to-face interaction, whether it's representing a brand. So I think ultimately, yeah, it's great to have that W-2 or whatever you want to call that income, but it's also nice to be able to feel that you've created something or are behind something as the face of the company.
Right, and the two fields certainly can marry easily. So we have just a little bit of time left, so just a quick question, quick answer here. One final tip for maybe some of your fellow recent grads who may be thinking about getting into real estate. I know we covered that a little bit, but one quick final tip for people who are thinking about it.
For sure. I think the biggest thing is just take that leap of faith. If you think you're interested in it, start to, you know, build knowledge or get some expertise in reading. Reading is incredible, and just go for it. Mentor, find a mentor, and just take that leap, and you'll know within 18 months and a year if you like it.
And I think that Jake here has given us some really good advice. I know that I've learned quite a bit. Thanks so much to my special guest, Jake Ashley, aspiring CPA, as well as future budding real estate mogul. I'm sure we will all be reading about him in a business magazine in the future. But he offers good advice for recent graduates, people who are starting out a career. You know, take that leap. Don't be afraid to fail, and but also more importantly, build out your network, because you never know who they might know. So again, thanks so much to my guests. Join us next time when we tackle another topic out of the Personal Finance Playbook.